Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Ash and I'm here today with Kane. How are you, Kane?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Today we're going to have a chat about podcast titles.
Yeah, like name of shows specifically.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of these things that gets done incorrectly a lot, and everything I'm going to say in terms of advice is for the masses. You know, we've worked with a lot of hosts over the years, and this is sort of the general rule, but there's always exceptions. You know, most celebrity podcasts and anybody like big brands, they can get away with sort of naming it whatever they want because they've got a big budget, they've got a big following. But for most people, following these rules is going to help you get found organically, and everything that we're going to be talking about is designed for you to get found organically from somebody who's never heard of you before, might be in a different country. You might not even be speaking the same language necessarily. Maybe English isn't their first language. You just want to make it as easy as possible for a stranger, a layman, to find you. So let's get into it. First of all, length, 2 to 4 words. It doesn't want to be any longer than that. You know, if you can get 2 words, 3 words, that's fantastic. 4 is the absolute max. And you don't want any of those words to be particularly long. You've got to think people are listening or watching on their phone. So when they're scrolling through the app, a lot of the time you see, you know, the ... where it continues and they can't see it. Well, that's just wasted now. You want them to be able to see the whole word, memorize it, make it very simple. And within those 2 to 4 words, it doesn't necessarily need the word podcast in it. I know this one has it twice, but generally speaking, it doesn't need it in it. Sometimes it sounds good. You know, sometimes it just rolls off the tongue, but a lot of the time that's a waste of a word. Everybody knows it's a podcast. They're on the podcast app. And the most important part is it has to say exactly what it does on the tin, right? So most people will just come up with a name that is like, quote, sexy. And it's like, or maybe it's a pun and it's like a word.
Trying to be clever sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then the problem with that is nobody's searching for that. And sometimes when it's too clever, you read it and you don't actually understand what content you're going to receive from that person. So straight away, if you've got, you know, the Podcaster's Podcast, or you've got, you know, the Ashley Morris Show, you don't really, from the Ashley Morris Show, you don't know that you're talking about podcasting. You listen to the Podcaster's Podcast, you go, oh, well, it's a podcast for podcasters. I'm a podcaster, or I'm trying to be. Great, that's for me. And that's exactly what you want. So it shouldn't be filled with jargon, you know, overly technical words. So if you're in an industry that is quite technical, you don't want to fill it with loads of very long, complicated words that most people don't use in their normal vocabulary. Because again, the layman in a different country scrolling through Apple charts or whatever, they're not going to understand that you are for them. So that sort of brings me on to number 4, which I've half mentioned there, is don't name it after yourself unless you are already a well-known person. You know, people will say, you know, oh, you got the Joe Rogan experience, you got, you know, Tim Ferriss's show. Great. They've been doing it 13 years and both of them were already very well-known when they started. So it doesn't really count. You know, they are the exception to the rule. So to recap, 2 to 4 words, must say exactly what it does on the tin, shouldn't be too clever, and it shouldn't really be your name. They're like the golden rules of picking the perfect name. Now, I recommend people come up with, you know, 3 or 4 of them and put them out there to polls, you know, to your audience, to like whether that is on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn, it's on Instagram, it's in real life, it is wherever. But follow that framework, come up with a few, and then that can be part of your pre-launch marketing, which is making people aware that a show might be coming soon.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's almost as if the more boring the name, the better sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you try and be too clever with it or try and change words around to maybe have your initials in there or something like it doesn't make any sense. To you, it seems really clever, but to the average Joe, it's not going to make any sense whatsoever, and it's not going to entice them to click on it.
Absolutely. Like some of the ones we worked on, you got the interesting health and safety podcast, the learning and development podcast. Like they are one, they've got all of the keywords necessary for people searching, because that's the other thing, is 40% of podcasts roughly are found through search on app, so on the podcast app. And what are people searching? Well, they're searching for the problems to their pain points, or they're searching for a podcast in this particular niche. So make sure people understand what your niche is and what you're talking about within the title of your show. Because if not, 40% is a big chunk of people. And you could be missing out on hundreds of thousands of people, depends on where your show gets to, that could have easily accidentally found you, but you didn't because you made it something really convoluted and random.
Absolutely. And going back to what you were saying about putting your name in the title as well, that's one of those things. If you've already got a following, you can get away with it. If you're really trying to build your personal brand, maybe. But if you're not, and if that's not your driving reason, and you haven't already got a following, it's only going to hinder you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a final point is, whether it's your personal name or your business name, your podcast doesn't need to represent either of those. It needs to do whatever it takes to build the audience. So it needs to work as a podcast name first. And then when you grow your show, during the conversation like this, you can say, oh, my business is Progressive Media, or my name is Kane Barron and Ashley Morris. You don't need those things in the actual title, because nobody will click on it if that's the title. Even one of the biggest podcasts in the world, Stephen Bartlett, his podcast is called Diary of a CEO. You know, it's not Social Chain, which was his company. It's not Stephen Bartlett. And he already had like 1 million followers when he started. It's about having a name that works as a podcast name, not your business or your personal name.
Absolutely. I speak to quite a lot of businesses that are thinking, oh, right, I'm going to name the podcast exactly the same as the business. And first of all, quite often the business name doesn't actually say what the business does. Yeah. So straight away you're losing out in that sense. And it also makes it seem almost too commercial. People like personal content. They probably wouldn't want to listen to a podcast that is named after a business. They'd rather listen to a podcast which is named after the content. And I think that is definitely a big thing.
100%. So thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of the Podcasters Podcast. If you leave us a review, we do check them all. So leave a review with any questions you want answering, and we'll definitely make an episode to answer them.
Cheers, guys.
If you'd like help picking the perfect podcast name for your show, then feel free to reach out to us. Our information is down below.